Good morning. Today I was going to share a quick word out of this biography, or not a biography, a book of just little brief biographies. Mike Ray put it together. Good friend of ours, pastor in Napa, and he's got a great church, and he's been there a long time, and I'm not sure how long. I'm going to say 30 years, but a terrific guy, good friend of ours. And I'm just very thankful for men and ladies, their wives, who stuck with it and kept doing right. But he had compiled this, the thought being, if they can make it, you can too. And today I was going to read just a short page on Ann Judson. Many people know the name Adoniram Judson. He had three wives. Each the ladies had died along the way. Life in that day, life was not easy for ladies in general. The West, people coming to the West during the gold rush and all that, very hard on ladies. Many men buried their wives, especially during childbirth. But Ann Judson, I'll just read a word about her. Ann Hazelton Judson only lived to the age of 37. She was saved at the age of 16, fell in love with Adoniram Judson. She was the first woman to leave America as a foreign missionary. She and her husband had only been married a short while when they sailed from Massachusetts toward Burma. Because of her frail health, her friends secured a young woman to help her on the voyage. However, her companion had serious convulsions and died at sea. Terrible seas made the journey miserable. Rocky shores, cannibals on the islands, high winds, they were enough to discourage any new missionary. When they did arrive, the country was so dilapidated, neglected, and filthy. The house where they stayed was near where public executions took place and where the deposit for city refuge was. They lived near the dump. They were so lonely upon their arrival, they did not receive a letter from home for 2.5 years. She had 3 children who died in infancy. They were exposed to robbers and home invasions. It was 4 years before the Judsons could teach or preach in the native language. But even with all this, they were happy and content. And one of the things we forget in the ministry, and when we as a church send missionaries, we need to understand they're going into the darkness of the world. They're going in, especially if they're new, they're going in to break down the shackles of satanic bondage that these places are in. And sometimes it takes years to bring some deliverance. And once a missionary comes and kind of breaks through things, and I don't understand it, but I can tell you it's real. There are spiritual battles to be fought, and prayer and Bible and endurance and much suffering. Like the first troops going into battle, often they're the ones where the most casualties are. And these new missionaries, they're going to be under attack and severe attack. Anne supported her husband as he was imprisoned in Burma. He was an American, but in Burma there was war with Great Britain. And he tried to explain to him, I'm an American, but he was white, and that's all that mattered. And so he was in prison. Civil war plagued the country. Her life was in constant danger. Once her husband was in prison, being accused of being an ally of the British. She spent most of her time trying to secure his freedom. She did all she could to find food for him and get food to him. And when she was allowed to be near to him, and horrible times. There were times he would be at night, they'd be jammed up into these little cubicles, or times he'd be hung from his feet. And they didn't have to worry about people escaping when they're hanging like bats. And he was housed in a 30-foot by 40-foot wooden room with 100 other prisoners, all in chains or stocks. Plagues of cholera, smallpox, and fever spread throughout the country. Adoniram was finally released, and then his wife and baby Maria both died. That was 1826. She had ministered by translating portions of the Bible, witnessing, giving medical help, and trying just to keep her husband alive. In 8 years, the entire Burmese Bible was translated and printed. And Anne of Ava, AVA, is a biography of her life. Be a great read for some family. There's another book I picked up not long ago called The Three Mrs. Judsons, and tells about each of these unique ladies, that they're willing literally to give their lives for the mission field. And it's no easy task. And these will be heroes in heaven. There's no question about that. I hope you remember our March Gladness offering. Each March we have a special project. And this year our March Gladness offering is to resurface the roof. In my office, I'm facing the Sunday school building, so the east side, the east half or so of our roof needs to get redone, and so I hope everybody will do something for it, and whatever you can afford, whatever God leads you to do, it'd be a help. Make sure you put it in the offering and mark it roof, or put it in an envelope, mark it March Gladness offering or whatever, and that'll be sure that the money gets to the right place. And there's a lot to be done. And I'm so thankful for our church, for the visitors. We've had so many visitors coming to church, and we've had people being saved and baptized. This last Sunday, we had 2 men baptized. And I love it when men are making spiritual decisions. We got to get the men. We can have good wives and good ladies, but if we don't reach the men, we're not going to reach the homes and the country. We've got to reach the men for Christ. And so you'll pray. Pray for souls. Pray that God would move in hearts and save people. But I want to mention 2 Kings chapter 5. 2 Kings 5. Looking at a story here of a man whose pride just about destroyed him. And there's a man named Naaman. You might know the story. Naaman was a general, and he was sent. He'd come through the land of Israel, picked up a gal, and she was his wife's handmaid. A child, probably teenager at best, probably not even a teen yet. And Naaman, great man, mighty warrior, but he was a leper. Of course, that caused him to be separate from his family and separate from social contact, and it was going to kill him eventually. But this little gal said, I wish he could meet the preacher back home, and he'd take care of it. Now, this is a gal of faith. Understand, she'd lost her city, her country. She'd lost her church. She'd lost her friends. She'd lost her family. She'd lost all of her spiritual ties. And she'd never seen a leper healed. Remember, over in the New Testament, it says in the days of Elijah, none were healed except Naaman the leper. And Jesus was talking about how there are a lot of lepers, but only one, and that wasn't even a Jewish person. And so she'd never seen a leper, but she just knew. She knew God was able. And she knew this guy needed to get to the preacher. And if he got to the preacher, God would take care of him. And so he's there. And so he traveled all the way across from his home country, from Syria, and he comes down there and he shows up at the king. And then, long story, he gets over to Elijah's. And he gets there to where Elijah is. And Elijah sent a message to him. He wouldn't even go himself. And the message was, go and wash in Jordan 7 times, thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. And here he'd come all this way. He was a big shot. He's in the country, a vanquished country. And here's I'm sure it was no mansion that this preacher lived in. And he's at this preacher's house, and the preacher didn't even come out and say hi or welcome or nothing. And he just sent a message, go wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Well, Jordan's a dirty old muddy river. And he says, well, I could go to my own country. I've got better rivers than this at home. I go and see, he forgot that it wasn't the water getting him clean. It was the God of the water. It was the God of Israel who was going to cleanse him. And we better not get so busy thinking logic that we forget there's a God in heaven. You're better off tithing and living on 90% of your money than you are not tithing, living on 100%. It does not make financial sense or fiscal sense. It makes spiritual sense. God is involved in our lives, and we've got to keep our mind on that thing. Raising children, marriage, money, you name it. And so Naaman, he was wroth. In verse 11, 2 Kings 5, he said, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call in the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leprosy. He wanted some big thing. And he's angry. He's just took off. I'm done. I'm not doing it. And one of his servants said, if he'd asked you to do some great thing, you'd do it. Why? Just dip it in the water 7 times. What difference does that make? Well, Naaman was humble enough. He listened, and he goes down, dips himself in the water, and it says in verse 14 that his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was cleansed. Think about what pride could have done to Naaman. His pride just about left him a leper the rest of his life. His pride was this close to keeping him from being healed. Think about it. He was able to hug his wife again. He was able to hold his grandchildren. He was able to shake a man's hand and embrace a friend. He was going to lose it all because of his pride. And sometimes I think our pride is so deadly. The things that our pride would keep us from doing. You think of Pharaoh. Remember back in Egypt, Moses comes down and says, you better let my people go, or you're in big trouble. And there was plague after plague. And 3 or 4 times during those 10 plagues, it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart. A couple times it says God hardened his heart, but several times Pharaoh hardened his heart. Pharaoh knew. At one point, Pharaoh's servants came and said, let him go. Don't you know the whole country of Egypt has been wasted by these people? Let them go. By now, he was so angry. He said, no, I'm not going to let these people go. And his pride not only cost him his life and the life of his whole army as they tried marching across the river and the Red Sea closed on them and drowned them all, but his pride destroyed his whole nation. What a mess. Had he been willing, like Naaman, to just humble himself and say, you know what? I want to do what God says because God is right. Over in Acts chapter 21, here's Herod, and he gives this oration, he gives a speech. And the people said, because they were getting his tax money, and they were being cared for by King Herod. And he gave this oration, and the people said, it's the voice of a God and not a man. And he just thought that was really great. And because he wouldn't give God any glory, God smote him. And right immediately in front of those people, worms came up and ate him bodily alive right in front of him. These worms ate him up. It says the people gave a shout saying it's the voice of a God and not a man. And suddenly the worms ate this guy up. Would that not scare the fire? That's like a Halloween movie. But again, foolish pride. It is so crazy to get arrogant, to let our pride keep us from admitting we're nobody. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? Daniel came along to Nebuchadnezzar and said, you're in big trouble. You better humble yourself before God or bad days are coming. And he just kept thinking he was somebody. At one point he said, he's looking out over the kingdom, and he said, is not this great Babylon that I have built? And like that, God smote him. Fingernails grew, hair grew like feathers, and he walked and crawled and wallowed in the fields and ate grass like an ox for 7 years. And after 7 years, it says he looked up, and God gave him his sight and his hearing and his senses back as a man. And he said, now I praise and extol the God of heaven. He said, man, he's God. He sure is God. Humble. Pride literally destroys us. It takes away our life, and humility lifts us up. And what a tragedy this Naaman, he got this close to never again holding a wife or a child, never shaking a hand, and suddenly, because he humbled himself and was submissive to the will of God, he was healed. Could you imagine? He's cleansed, his skin like the skin of a little child, just fresh baby skin, no calluses, no scars. And he rides into town, and he goes up to his house, and there's that handmaid that said, I wish you could see the preacher. Man, don't you think he loved on that little gal and gave her everything she needed, took care of her like she was his own daughter? I bet you he was careful who she married, careful to make sure she didn't have to work too hard. And he was able to embrace his wife and live a normal life. All that could have been lost because of pride. But you know what I think in our culture? There are people who get baptized, but they're just a little proud to get up there and in front of God and everybody be put underwater. I think there's people who teach a Sunday school class, but they're a little embarrassed because they've never done it before and they don't know how to. Well, you learn like you learn to tie your shoes and drive a car. You let somebody teach you how to do it. There are people who would witness to their friends, but they're too proud. They're worried what their friends might think. There are people in a church like ours and churches all around the country. Somebody should be teaching a Sunday school class. Somebody should be working in a rest home or a jail service somewhere. But their pride, they don't want. I don't want to get out of my comfort zone. And yet there are people whose lives could be changed for eternity if they would just humble themselves and just say, I'm going to be there. There are people, I guarantee you, Sunday there'll be people at home who think we need to get our family into church. We need God. But they're too proud to say to their husband or their wife, you know what, why don't we get into church? Or we're too proud to say to our kids, hey kids, Dad needs God. And I want you kids to join me as we go to church looking for God. People are too proud to say, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I've been out of church for a long time. And we're too proud to admit that that we got saved and we got growing and then we got backslidden and we're not doing anything wrong maybe, but we're out of church. And think about your children. Are your children even saved yet? That person who gets out of church and then their pride keeps them from coming back. Oh, they don't want to come back. I'll be embarrassed. Everybody will say, well, where have you been? And about time you came back. And our pride. But what about our children? You going to let your children go to hell? You're going to let your children grow up in a secular home with no preaching and no Sunday school and no invitations and nobody telling your children how to get saved, all because you're too proud to say, you know what, it's time I get back to God. It's time I get back to church. Kids, I want you to know something. Your daddy's a Christian, but I've not lived like it. But we're going to go back, and daddy's going to, or mama, we're going to go back and we're going to live this Christian life. And I think there are probably people who are going to go to hell, and they know they need to get saved. A friend witnessed to him, a neighbor witnessed to him, somebody invited him to church multiple times. And somebody talked to him, then talked to him again. And then what happened to him? Well, they got a little busy. And then they got to think, well, I don't know. And I'd get saved. Somebody's giving me a tract. Somebody's invited me to church. But they're just too proud to admit they need God. And they're going to die and go to hell because of their foolish pride. Oh, don't let your pride destroy you. I think in our marriages, there's some I'm sorry's that ought to be said, but we're too proud to admit we were wrong. But we need to get those I'm sorry said. It'll cost you. It'll cost your marriage. The humility the price of humility you pay is far less than the price of a broken relationship. Oh, let's be careful to not let pride ruin us.